Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Irish NFL show with me, Colm Cronin. And today I have the great privilege and honor to welcome a brilliant and principled reporter and a gifted storyteller to the show, Jim Trotter. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. I appreciate that introduction. So we won't tell your audience how much I paid you to say that, but thank
Well, I mentioned just before we started recording, we are, or we at least we consider ourselves a nation of storytellers here in Ireland. It's what we kind of pride ourselves on. And you mentioned that you call it out in your LinkedIn bio. And I suppose in terms of for you, is that storytelling, has that always been central to your approach, or is that something that developed as your career developed, Jim?
Yeah, it's something that developed. When I first started covering the NFL, I was a beat reporter for what was then the San Diego Chargers. So as a beat reporter, you're strictly or primarily focused on news and being the day-to-day conduit between the team and the fans. And so for me, and it may be different for others, but for me, it was more of focusing on making sure that I covered all of the basics, that we were solid there, and didn't feel like I did a lot of feature writing and that things. I mean, you're still storytelling, but you're storytelling from a different standpoint. It's from a news or informational standpoint. And when I left the beat and went to Sports Illustrated, now you start getting into more long form writing. And so there's that opportunity to really take a deep breath and try and tell a story and take your audience behind the scenes a little bit, or to remove the helmet from the player and be able to help the audience understand who that player is as a person and not just as a player. And so for me, that's when I really feel that I started to get into the storytelling aspect of the NFL.
And in terms of, when we go back to, your starting out in journalism, was that something that you had wanted? Did you always have a curiosity in terms of people? And I know the storytelling part came later, but in order to be a journalist, to be a good journalist, you have to be curious about people and about events and about stories.
Yeah, that's the key word there you mentioned, is curious. And I had an interest as a teenager pursuing journalism. But at the time in high school, I was playing on various sports teams, and obviously you can't play on a team and write about a team. So, or you can, but it's an obvious conflict of interest. And so I never got into writing for the school newspaper or anything like that. When I got to college, I knew right away that I had an opportunity to play some small college football, but I knew I was never going to be good enough to play professionally. And so I was focused on trying to find a career, knowing that I love sports. I wanted to find a way to stay close to sports without actually playing. And one of the ways to do that was by writing about it. And so from the moment, I landed on a college campus, it was with the intent of becoming a sports writer. And that's been my focus every day, since I turned 18 years old. And here I am today, some 40 plus years later, still doing the same thing and living out, that dream that I had.
Now, you even called it out there in terms of the conflict of interest, and I think that's interesting, right? Because when I think of you, and I think when a lot of people, you see it on social media all the time, people talk about Jim Trotter principled. It is a word, and you live that value, right? It shines off. And I'm 5,000 miles away. I had the opportunity to say hello and shake your hand at the Super Bowl, which was fantastic. But even from this distance, I could see that come through your work. When was that instilled in you, Jim? And like it, because it not everyone has it.
No, I appreciate that. Look, I'm flawed like everyone else, and I just try to be the best version of me that I can be. Um, some days are better than others, but for me, the whole, you know, principled stand as a journalist, I think, really goes back to college. I mean, first of all, you have to have, it's the way you're brought up, I believe, in terms of believing that those things are important, that honesty and integrity and those things are really core values of who you are as a person. but then it's also about the training that you get in this profession. And so for me, it was in college where, two of my professors, one a print professor, one a broadcast professor, were exceptional in the industry during the time that they were in it. And these are the type of things that they preach to us. And so going to a historically Black college at Howard University, you understand that you are going to be looked at differently and that you're not going to be given the same leeway that some others might. And so therefore, you better be on your P's and Q's. And as best as I can, that's what I try and do. And I try and live up to the standards that these professors, provided to us. And I think about them anytime I get in a moment of say, conflict or crisis or just these internal battles that take hold of you sometimes. I think back to those instructors and the lessons they try to provide and hopefully let them be my moral compass.
And, I'm thinking of universities. Certain universities get, I suppose, when we think of, say, Iowa at the moment, right? Tight end U or others about the great players. I think it's fair to say Howard should have, and I think does have, a reputation for producing stellar journalists.
Oh, no question. The bar has been set so high. Howard has produced so many talented people in so many professions. The first Black Supreme Court justice in the United States was Thurgood Marshall, who went to Howard Law School. You can go down the entertainment industry, you can go through business, you can go through communication, as you say. We've had so many talented people in the communications profession, the journalism profession. So there is a standard. At least I believe that we all have to uphold, and I try as best I can to do that.
Now, you did spend a significant amount of time in San Diego, which I think couldn't be much more different to Ireland weather-wise, certainly.
I still live here, still live in San Diego.
I can understand why. I've had the good fortune to travel quite a bit. It's a wonderful part of the world. In terms of, because you wrote a couple of books with Junior Seau and Superstar. Talk to me and my listeners, because there'll be some people on this side of the world who are incredibly familiar with Junior Seau and who he was as a person and a player, but we're getting into maybe the next generation of fans who won't be as familiar. And I think it'd be interesting to hear from you as somebody who got to know him and covered him.
Yeah, if you're a football fan, I would explain it this way. Obviously, every generation is different. If you look at the linebacker position, you could go back to the Dick Butkuses of the world, the Ray Nitskys, and move forward from there. Every generation with the guys who stood out. Junior would be in that lineage of just all-time elite linebackers, and so I like to say that as much as anyone, he is responsible for me being where I am today. From this standpoint, I had never covered an NFL team on a daily basis when I was assigned to be the beat writer for the Chargers. And the first day that I walked in the locker room, it was the off season. And so there wasn't anyone in there. There were just two players. So we walk in the locker room, and across the room, I see Junior, shirt off, walking to the training room, just this physical specimen. And you're like, holy shit, That's what physically a football player is supposed to look like. But anyway, he turns and he sees me and he stops and he calls me over. And again, I've never met him. Obviously know of him, all those sorts of things, but have never been formally introduced to him. So he calls me over and he says, you're the new guy. And I said, yeah. And he says, I'm Junior Seau. And I'm thinking in my head, like, no shit, like, we don't know who you are. And anyway, we talked for a minute, and then when we finished, he says, if you need anything, you call me, take my number. And, I'm thinking, man, this guy's got to be punking me here, because Junior had a reputation among some in the media of at times being a little surly or difficult. And again, I have no relationship with him. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe this guy's setting me up. So obviously I want to see if he's legit, but I don't just want to call the number without having something to say. And so a few days later, there was something that happened in the off season. I said, well, let me call him. Let me see, if this is legit. It was my excuse to use the number. And so I dial the number and I'm thinking I'm going to get, Domino's pizza or something like that. And voicemail comes on and it's Junior. And so I leave a message and he calls me back. And so I'm like, man, this dude is real. This is somebody I think that, I can trust. And over the years, we developed a relationship where people thought we were close to the point he's giving me inside information. What they didn't understand is that Junior never gave inside information. Junior was fiercely protective of the team and his teammates. But what he did for me is he helped me to understand the culture of a locker room. He helped me to understand the mindset of a professional athlete, and particularly a great professional player. And so I'll tell you one story. I'm on the beat maybe a year or two, and the Chargers had a bad year. And so they go out in free agency and they spend all this money. And they bring in a cornerback, pay him a lot of money. I think made him the highest paid cornerback at that time. His name was Ryan McNeil. So I'm watching Ryan in training camp, and Ryan looks awful. I mean, he's just consistently getting beaten and just looks like he doesn't have a clue. And so I'm thinking, man, they signed a bust here. They wasted a lot of money and whatnot. And so Junior being the leader of the defense and the leader of the team, I go to him to talk about it. Like, what's the deal with this guy? And Junior says, pump the brakes. He said, look, the veteran players use training camp as a means of working on their weaknesses, not their strengths. He said, so don't get caught up into all of this at this point. Long story short, Ryan McNeil goes out and leads the NFL in interceptions that year. So imagine how ridiculous I would have looked if I had written at that point, the Chargers signed a player who's a bust, wasted all of this money, and then he goes out and leads the league in interceptions. So not only would I look silly, but I would have burned any credibility I had in the locker room with those players by going after a guy without knowing, again, the culture and context of what was happening. And those were the sorts of things that Junior did for me in terms of helping me understand, how to navigate those waters. And for that, I will be forever indebted to him.
A great story that really illustrates that point. Jim, I read online, and again, you can read lots of things, but I read during your time at Sports Illustrated, I guess they asked you kind of to name 3 memorable articles, and you talked about, obviously, Sean Taylor and his passing and the media reaction. You talked about Tim Tebow and my Broncos, and you talked about the Raiders kind of, and Al Davis and in the post Al Davis world. That was a while ago. Do those stories still resonate as strongly?
Yeah, they'll always resonate because they have a certain uniqueness to them. I mean, we've all written the features on players and whatnot, but there are certain personalities, players that there's something that makes them different or unique, if you will. And for me, the Sean Taylor story was memorable because here you had a young man who had been murdered. And at the time, we didn't know that. We just knew that he had been killed, that there was a break-in at the home, he had been killed. And because of his recent past and some troubles he had gotten into, people right away started jumping to conclusions that his past had caught up to him. Basically, he had brought this on himself and all of this. And for me, being a Black man in particular, I'm saying, well, wait a minute, hold on. Young people grow and young people evolve, and we don't know all the facts in this story yet. So why are we painting a picture of him in such a negative way? And people in the profession that I respect were doing it because, in this industry now, it's man, you got to feed the beast. We got to have instant analysis. There's no time to wait on the facts and the investigations. And so people were jumping to conclusions, and it really made me uncomfortable and made me uneasy. And so I said I wanted to write about it. And I'd only been at Sports Illustrated, I think, if memory serves me right, it might have been a couple of weeks or something. It was not very long. And so I was nervous about taking on such a sensitive topic, and at the same time calling out colleagues as well, including some of whom I was working with at Sports Illustrated. And one of the editors there at the time, Mike Blevins, told me, we hired you for a reason, and we hired you for your voice, and that's what we want. And so I just wrote it. And it turned out that his past had nothing to do with what happened, that there was a break-in at the home. They didn't expect him to be there, and he was defending his family and was shot and killed. I can't think of something more honorable than defending your family against intruders who have broken into your house. What a completely different narrative from Sean Taylor was a bad guy whose past caught up to him. And so I think that's one of the things I take pride in the most in what I do, is at least trying in these type situations to say, hold on a minute, don't rush to conclusions, see where the facts take you, and then write from that perspective. And it's hard to do in today's climate, again, because everyone wants instant analysis, instant, opinion, etc. So that one stood out to me. Tim Tebow, this, being a Bronco fan, he was such a unique guy in terms of he was so polarizing, either positively or negatively. People had opinions. There were very few people who were right in the middle. And just like, okay, Tim Tebow, they either loved him or they hated him. And there were some weird things that defied description with him that year with the Broncos when he took over as a starting quarterback, where games they never should have been in and games where he looked god-awful for 3 quarters, all of a sudden in the 4th quarter, this guy would just become Joe Montana or whoever and lead his team to victory. And I'll never forget once where I almost said Sean Taylor, where cornerback, Hall of Fame cornerback for the Broncos.
Champ Bailey,
thank you. I'm in the locker room after one such game where Tim looked awful for 3+ quarters. The team looked out of it. They end up winning. I think it might have been their 6th win in a row after Tim took over. And I walk in the locker room and I'm talking to Champ, and he just looks exhausted. And I'm saying to him, man, you just won 6 in a row. Why not more excitement and whatnot? And I'll never forget, he said to me, he goes, man, it's hard to win like this every week. And he was right, but they were winning. And so everybody was cool with it and that sort of thing. And so it just became to me this story about what is it about this guy that he can look like he doesn't belong on the field for those first 3 quarters. And then in crunch time, you're like, where's this been all game, and even led him to a playoff win that year, So Tim was one of those fascinating guys for me. And we know that the religion angle to it too, that played into it in terms of the discussion and the polarization and all of that. And then lastly, for the Raiders, it was simply no franchise to me was more closely associated with its owner than the Raiders and Al Davis. And so after Al passed, I just thought, man, it would be great to do a story on how does an organization, how does a franchise follow, proceed after the death of its patriarch. And Reggie McKenzie was gracious enough to give me some time over the course of that following year, coming in as the first general manager that franchise had who was not Al Davis in all of those decades, and allowing me to write about it and whatnot. And the thing is, it didn't go over well with Al's son. Mark Davis didn't like it. He felt that, it had portrayed his father in a negative light, and I can understand the sensitivities. But in order to tell where they were going, you have to tell where they were. And at that point, the Raiders were one of the worst franchises in the NFL and just totally dysfunctional. And I can't tell you the story of what Reggie McKenzie had to deal with without telling you all of the things that were involved with where that franchise was at the time. So Mark Davis, to this day, really, as I understand it, doesn't want much to do with me. But and again, I get it. It's his father. It doesn't matter that in the story I talked about what an icon Al Davis was and how he's truly one of the legends of the game and whatnot. The fact that I also focused on that period of time that was not so positive, I'd probably take it personal too if it were my father that was being written about. So that's why those three things stand out to me in terms of the time that I was with Sports Illustrated, because there was something unique about those stories.
I think, again, your willingness to put yourself in Mark Davis's shoes and see it and understand. Of course, it's his father. It's not possible to be objective generally when one talks about family. I suppose the other thing that would be interesting to me as well as listeners, because I have the good fortune of being married to a wonderful woman from Minnesota, and she actually went to school with Larry Fitzgerald. She was in Holy Angels with Larry.
Okay.
And Larry is a player who obviously you got to know, and we got to see Larry's gifts on the field. And I know Larry now has a podcast, but it felt like Larry was a guy who, for most of certainly his career, he allowed his performances on the field to do the talking, and we didn't get to know Larry really.
It's funny you mentioned him. I've got a painting of him up in front of me here that's signed by him. He actually bought it for me at one of his charity events, foundation events. I was going to buy it myself. Obviously, I can't outbid Larry Fitzgerald. And he ended up buying it. I didn't know, and then he gave it to me, which was pretty cool and pretty special. So I had it framed, and it's on the wall here. I wish I could show it to you, but Larry, I got to know back in, I think it was, and the years all run together now, but I think it was the 2008 season when they went to the Super Bowl. But I was working at Sports Illustrated, and they sent me to Arizona to do a story on Larry Fitzgerald and Anquan Boldin, and were they arguably the greatest wide receiver tandem in NFL history. And so I went out to talk to both of them and wrote this story, and Arizona turned out to be pretty good that year, pretty good to the point that they went to the Super Bowl. Well, no one expected them to do that. And when the playoffs got ready to start, if you'll remember, a week before the playoffs started, they got blitzed by the New England Patriots. I mean, I think they lost by 40, 45 points, something like that. And everyone was saying what a fraud this team is. So the playoffs roll around. I'm the low man on the totem pole at Sports Illustrated. So they say, Jim, you cover the Cardinals game, week 1. And everyone's expecting the Cardinals to be knocked out right away. Well, they win and win impressively. I think it was the Packers they beat. And if memory serves me right, it was actually an overtime game, like 45-42 or something like that. I can't remember the score, but it was a hell of a game. And Larry plays great. So the next week they're going to go play at Carolina, which I believe was the number 1 seed, or pretty high up there. And so again, they're thinking, the Cardinals are going to get knocked out this week. Jim, you got the Cardinals. So I go and cover the Cardinals. Anquan Boldin doesn't play because of injury. Larry goes off again. So now we're in the NFC Championship game. And they're like, well, we can't take you off of him now. Game's in Arizona. Jim, you got the game. I'm like, okay. I think Larry put up 3 touchdowns in the first half in that game, if memory serves me. He has another great game. They end up winning. They go to the Super Bowl. So over the course of all these games, I'm developing a relationship with Larry where he's getting to know me. I'm getting to know him. Larry, as much as he wouldn't admit it, he loves the publicity of being a star player who performs best in the big games. So he understands how to work the media. His father's a sports writer. He grew up around it, so he knows. And so he's giving me what I need, to the point where even Super Bowl week, we were actually doing a diary together that was going to run, if they won, after the game, about what his week was like, where I'm talking to him every night about what each day was like for him. And he turns in this incredible performance in the Super Bowl. And they end up losing because Ben Roethlisberger leads this dramatic drive at the end and finds Santonio Holmes, and the rest is history. That offseason, they sent me out to Minnesota to be with Larry to do an offseason story at his offseason home in Eden Prairie. And so Larry agrees to have me come out, and couldn't have been more gracious. And so we get to know each other even more. And so the relationship just built from there, to the point where a few years ago, he was thinking about doing a book, and he had book agent reach out to me and say, Larry wants you to do his book. And so we worked on it the book was supposed to be done in time so that when he retired, then the book would publish. Well, Larry ended up playing like 3 more years after we started work on that book. And so by the end, it got to the point where he said, you know what, now's not the time for the book. I've got a lot more living to do. This was just the first chapter, so let's table it. And so the book never ended up publishing, because Larry's got more living to do, and his football career will be just one chapter in that. And he hopes it will be the smaller chapter, because he's hoping to do great things in the business world. So this is a long-winded way of saying, I developed a pretty good relationship with him, a lot of respect for him. I think he respects me. And part of that is built on trust, like any relationship within the NFL. And that's what I tell young people all the time. This business is about relationships, and relationships are founded on trust. And so that's why when you talk about things like principles and integrity and all of that, they're important to me, because if you don't exercise those, people think the NFL is some giant, thing. It's really, really small. And you develop a reputation really quickly among people you don't even know. So how you conduct yourself is really important. And so for me, I've always known, there will be times I have to write things that are critical, but it's how you do it that will determine how you are perceived. And so I never try and ambush players or coaches or anyone. If I have something negative to say, I make the attempt to reach out to them first, to let them know that I'm writing something that they would consider to be negative, and to give them an opportunity to address it. Some choose to, some don't. But at least I know I made the effort. And I think that's carried me a long way in this business, particularly with guys like Larry, because when I was writing the Junior Seau book after Junior passed away, Larry would call me at various times and say, how's the book going? I'm like, well, this, it's going okay. This is happening, whatever. And there were some sensitive things. And he would say to me, are you going to write it? And I'm not thinking anything about it. I'm just thinking we're having a conversation. I said, well, probably not. And he said, why not? And I said, because it would be unfair to his family. They don't know some of these things. And for me to write it without him being here to comment on it, I think would be really hurtful and unfair to his family. What I didn't realize is those conversations were part of the reason he reached out to have me do his book, because he wanted someone he could trust, knowing there would be certain things that might be sensitive. Would I just take it and run with it? And would I be salacious with it? Or could he trust that it was going to be handled in a professional way? And, and that meant a lot to me, that he would think that I would do it in a professional way.
I think that's a testament to you. And there's an infinite number of things I'd love to get into with you, but I'm conscious you've been so generous with your time, and we are coming up to the top of the hour, and I'm sure you have other meetings. So maybe just a final question, which is totally unrelated, but I know you are a dog person, and anyone who follows you on Twitter will know that. And I know that many of our listeners, whenever we had Mina Kynes on, and she has her dog Letty. We will ask about Letty. We have, various other players that we've seen. Can you tell us a little bit about your dog?
Oh, my dog's the best. Her name is Nala. She's a full-blooded German Shepherd. She's beautiful. She's, for lack of a better word, can I say spunky? A lot of personality, very demanding. And that's from very early on, before we even got her, where we saw the videos of her when she was under 8 weeks, because we couldn't pick her up until she was 8 weeks. But the breeder would send us videos of her, and you could see how she was so demanding of her mother, wanting the attention and not to have her two brothers, get the attention and whatnot. And so nothing has changed since she came home with us. But she's just great. Dogs are the best. I mean, the unconditional love is just off the charts. And so she really is like a child, a human being, a child for us. We love her as much as we love our two daughters. And I just can't imagine her not being here. But it can be tiring at times because she's very demanding. And I remember one time I came home from a trip when she was younger, and I opened up the trunk to pull my suitcase out, and she had to be under a year, and she jumped in my trunk, and it was almost as if she was saying, "You're not going to leave me again. I'm going, wherever you go, I'm going." And so we joke now that we should have named her Shadow, because anytime I move, she moves, and anywhere I go, she goes. But I just love her to death, man. So like I say, dogs are the best. You can see I'm smiling because whenever I think of her, it brings me joy. So yeah, no, I love dogs, love my Nala. And I'm going downstairs as soon as I leave you. We'll be together.
She seems to be more of a soccer fan, though, than perhaps American football. Going by the pictures on Twitter, anyway.
No, dogs have peculiar personalities. They all have their own. And with her, what happened when she was a puppy, we got these rubber soccer balls, that are built for dogs. And what she would do is she would grab one in her mouth, and I'm thinking, okay, she wants me to kick it so she can chase it. And initially she did that, but then what she started doing is she would hold the ball in her mouth, and when I kicked the other ball, she would do these 360s, these violent 360s with a ball in her mouth. And that's what she does today. She'll have a soccer ball in her mouth. I'll kick the other one. She'll do a violent 360, or she'll turn and chase the one that I just kicked with one in her mouth. It's the weirdest damn thing, but it's what she does. The only time she chases a ball, truthfully, is if we are at the beach and I have one of those rubber baseballs and I throw it, and then she takes off after it and chases it. I still haven't gotten her to the point where she brings it back to me. But so sometimes I tell her, I'm getting more exercise out of this than you are. But that's just her. That's her personality, man. It's weird, but that's who she is.
Well, I'm glad that you have a special bond with her, and look forward to seeing more photos of her. Jim, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me, and want to wish you immense success in your new role with the Athletic, and look forward to seeing what you do there, and continuing to follow your career, continuing to read your pieces. You are somebody I look up to and admire, and thank you for chatting to me on the Irish NFL Show.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun. So, you know, to have you reach out from so far away, it means a lot. That's pretty cool.
Well, hopefully we'll get to maybe welcome you to Dublin at some point in the not too distant future.
I'd love to. Hopefully that happens.